rumors whispered through the covens that the marriage was nothing more than a cruel joke. A lethal, centuries-old vampire matriarch, taking a soft, plus-size, warm-blooded bride. A girl who would be dead of old age before she ever learned to survive the night. But the moment Celine Ravencroft caught her new wife starving herself, dimming the very warmth that had made her irreplaceable, she did not feel pity. She made a vow so dark and so absolute that it would leave the whole city trembling in the dark before the blood moon rose. The House of Ravencroft did not forgive debts. They drained them out of you, slow and patient, one cold heartbeat at a time. Mina Johnson learned this on a freezing Tuesday in November, standing in the flour-dusted kitchen of her father's little Bronx bakery. Her father, Thomas, owed a blood pact to the Night Court, a debt sealed years ago in a moment of desperation, when the bakery was drowning and a pale stranger offered to make the numbers disappear. The price had never been paper money. It was warmth. It was blood. It was a promise that would one day come due, and now it had. The collectors who came at dusk weren't interested in apologies, but the one who stepped out from behind them, tall, silver-eyed, ancient in a way that made the air feel thin, wasn't interested in blood tonight. She was looking for a wife. Celine Ravencroft needed a bride to hold her crown. It was written into the oldest law of her line. Before the coming blood moon, the matriarch had to bind herself to a chosen consort to prove she had a reason to keep the world standing instead of watching it burn. The immortal socialites of the upper covens bored her. The daughters of rival houses were too treacherous, all fangs and no heartbeat. But when Celine's cold silver eyes landed on Mina, flushed and alive, dusted in powdered sugar, radiating a warmth Celine hadn't felt in 300 years, the deal was struck in a single breath. Her life for her father's debt. Mina was no creature of the night. She was 24, undeniably plus-size, and used to fading into the wallpaper. She had thick thighs, a soft, heavy stomach, and arms that jiggled when she kneaded dough. In her own neighborhood, her softness was simply part of who she was, the sweet girl who baked the best cannoli on Arthur Avenue, the one who slipped extra bread to the old man on the corner. But thrust into the opulent, merciless world of the immortal elite, her body became the first thing they used against her. And the cruelest truth of all? It wasn't just her softness they mocked. It was her warmth, her mortality. The fact that her heart still beat, loud and stubborn, in a hall full of the silent dead. Before we go any further, and trust me, it's about to go somewhere very dark. This channel is brand new, and every single subscribe is what keeps stories like this one coming. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means more than you know. Hit that subscribe button, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, and let's step into Celine's world together. This is Nightborn Lady. Now, back to the bride who thought she had to disappear to survive. The wedding took place beneath a bleeding red moon in a cathedral that had been deconsecrated 2 centuries ago and reclaimed by the Night Court. It was a spectacle of ancient wealth and barely veiled contempt. As Mina walked down the aisle in a custom gown that had taken yards of extra midnight silk to make, she heard the whispers. They didn't even try to hide them. Look at her. Celine must have lost a wager. I heard the matriarch's going to drain that one dry by the 2nd week. Mortals don't last. A warm little thing like that? She'll be a meal, not a wife. The loudest and cruelest voice belonged to Carmilla Bathory. Razor-thin, ivory-skinned, ancient enough to have watched empires fall, and daughter to Lord Bathory of the rival house that controlled the harbor covens. Carmilla had fully expected to be the one standing at that altar. She had expected the crown. Instead, she watched a soft, blushing mortal baker take the ring that should have been hers, and something venomous curdled behind her painted smile. Selene stood at the altar, a monolith of black tailoring and lethal stillness. She spoke the binding words in a low, even voice that had commanded rooms for centuries, slid a ring set with a stone the color of old blood onto Mina's plump finger, and pressed her cold lips to Mina's forehead with a terrifyingly blank expression. She was fulfilling a contract. To her, Mina was collateral. Or so Mina believed. But there was a part of the ceremony no one whispered about, because they were too afraid to. The blood bond. When Selene's fangs grazed Mina's wrist and drew a single warm drop, and Mina, trembling, told what to do by the old law, pressed her lips to the cold pulse point beneath Selene's jaw. Something bound them that could never be spoken away. Selene felt it settle into her ancient bones like the first sunrise she'd survived in 300 years. From that night forward, she would feel Mina. Her warmth, her fear, the steady, stubborn drum of a heart that refused to be silent. She just didn't tell Mina that. Selene Ravencroft had never in her long life learned how to say a soft thing without making it sound like a threat. When they moved into Selene's sprawling glass-walled penthouse high above Tribeca, a fortress of black marble and windows glazed to hold back the dawn, the true isolation began. Selene was consumed by a brewing war with the Volkov line, an old and vicious rival house pushing up from the outer boroughs, hungry for territory. She left before the last of the moon set and returned long after Mina had cried herself to sleep in a bed the size of a small country. Mina was left alone in a beautiful, silent cage, surrounded by an army of pale, wordless staff who never quite met her eyes, and the deafening echo of Carmilla's wedding night words. A meal, not a wife. The turning point came 3 weeks in. Mina was expected, commanded, really, to attend a court gathering alongside the other consorts of the night. When she stepped into the fitting room where the couturier prepared the immortal wives for the season, the woman took one look at Mina's soft, heavy figure and let her lip curl. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Ravencroft," she said, in a voice like ice over silk. "We so rarely dress the living, and a figure like yours, well, we can drape you in something loose. Something forgiving." She said forgiving the way you'd say shameful. Mina retreated, cheeks burning, and the cruelty only sharpened from there. Carmilla and her circle of ancient, hollow-cheeked women waged a quiet, relentless war. Gifts began arriving at the penthouse, wrapped in black ribbon and poison. Pale skin elixirs promised to cool the vulgar mortal flush from her cheeks. Vials that claimed to thin the blood, refine the shape. Little notes, elegant and lethal, suggesting that if Mina truly wished to be worthy of the night court, she would learn to want less, to need less, to take up less space in a world that had already decided she took up far too much. And Mina, lonely, unseen, married to a woman who left before dawn and never once told her she was wanted, began to believe them. She looked at her wide hips and her soft belly in the floor to ceiling mirrors of that cold penthouse. And she made a quiet, terrible decision. The only way to survive this ruthless world, she thought, was to shrink herself until she finally fit inside it. Until she was small enough, cold enough, pale enough, that they might mistake her for one of them. So she began to let her warmth go out. It started small, the way these things always do. She stopped letting herself be fed. The rich meals Selene's staff laid out, she pushed them away, hid them, sent them back barely touched, murmuring that she'd eaten earlier, that she wasn't hungry, that mortals didn't need so much anyway. The hollow ache that grew inside her became a strange, twisted comfort, a distraction from the crushing loneliness of a marriage that felt like a locked door. But her body fought her. Her warm, living body, the very thing the bond fed on, began to fade. Her normally rosy, plump cheeks turned a sallow, ashen gray. Her hands trembled. A permanent fog settled behind her eyes, and the light that had made her glow like a hearth in a house of shadows began, one flickering night at a time, to dim. The court called it the dimming, when a mortal in a vampire's world starts to burn out from the inside. It was supposed to happen slowly, over decades. In Minna, driven by grief and cruelty, it was happening in weeks. And still, when Carmilla passed her at a court gathering and gave her a slow, approving, condescending nod, finally learning your place, little mouse, Minna felt a sick, hollow flush of victory. The shrinking was working. She thought that was a good thing. She did not understand, yet, that in a world of predators, nothing goes unnoticed. And Celine Ravencroft was the oldest predator in the city. Celine had ruled an empire of shadow and appetite for 3 centuries. Her mind was a steel trap of strategy and silence. You do not survive 300 years, 7 wars, and a dozen betrayals by failing to notice the small things. At first, she had kept her distance from her warm little bride. Minna was timid and soft and skittish, qualities that made something fierce and violently protective wake up in Celine's cold chest, and which she had absolutely no idea how to express without terrifying the girl half to death. So she watched instead. She watched Minna on the penthouse cameras from the dark of her study, mesmerized by the gentle sway of those wide hips, the plush softness of those thighs, the impossible, defiant warmth of a living thing moving through her house of stone. In a world made entirely of sharp edges and cold blood, Minna was the only thing Celine had ever seen that looked like peace. But by the 5th week of the binding, the peace was fracturing, and Celine felt it before she saw it. It came through the bond first. A wrongness. A cooling. She would be mid-negotiation across the city. A knife of a woman ending a Volkov envoy's sentence with a single look, and she would feel it. A thread of Minna's warmth going thin and gray, like a candle guttering in a draught. It ached in a place Celine had thought scarred over centuries ago. She told herself it was the war. It was not the war. Then came the confirmation. Her steward, a grim, ancient thing named Silas, who had served the house since before automobiles, laid a single sheet of paper on her black desk one evening and stood very still. "My lady." He hesitated, and Silas never hesitated. "The staff report the young mistress. She isn't taking anything. She hasn't let herself be properly fed in weeks. She hides it, sends it away. The dimming has set into her, and it's moving fast. If it continues, he didn't finish. He didn't have to." Celine's ancient blood ran cold, then hot, then something with no name at all. She pulled up the footage herself. She watched, frame by frame, as her warm, beautiful, soft wife sat alone at that enormous table, cut a rich meal into fragments too small to matter, moved them slowly around a plate, and quietly let it all be taken away untouched. She watched Minna catch her own reflection in the black window and flinch from it. She watched her wife look at her own gorgeous, living body like it was a crime she was trying to serve out a sentence for. And Celine Ravencroft, who had ordered the deaths of kings and never once lost sleep, felt her hands begin to shake with a fury so total it had no bottom. She did not feel pity. Pity was small. What she felt was the overwhelming, city-ending urge to find every single creature who had ever taught her wife to hate the warmth of her own body, and to make them understand, in the oldest and most personal language the night had ever known, exactly what they had done. Someone had poisoned her bride's mind. Someone had convinced the one warm, living, radiant thing in Celine's cold eternity that she was not enough. Someone was going to answer for it. She rose from her chair in the dark, and outside the glass, the city lights seemed to flinch. The dimming had a sound to it, though only the old ones could hear it. It was the sound of a fire being smothered, A low, sighing hush as warmth left a living thing that should have blazed for another 60 years. Celine had heard it once or twice across her long life, always from a distance, always with the cool detachment of a woman watching weather move across a far hill. Now she heard it every single night, coming from the other side of her own bedroom wall, and it was tearing her apart. Because here was the thing no one in the court understood, and the thing Celine refused to say aloud: the blood bond went both ways. Mina's warmth wasn't just something Celine admired. It was, now, part of what kept Celine human enough to matter. 300 years of cold had very nearly hollowed her out completely, and then a soft, blushing baker had pressed warm lips to her pulse, and for the first time in centuries, Celine had felt something like a dawn she could survive. Every night that Mina dimmed, Celine felt herself going colder too, drifting further from the last warm thing that had ever tethered her to the world. Mina thought she was quietly disappearing to make herself worthy. She had no idea she was, thread by thread, extinguishing the only light her wife had left. And the vultures had noticed. Of course they had. Carmilla Bathory understood the old law better than anyone. She knew that a bound consort who was dimming, a bride visibly, dangerously failing, was a bride the Blood Council could question. There was a clause, ancient and cruel. If a matriarch's chosen consort was deemed unfit to hold the warmth of the bond, the council could move to dissolve the binding before the blood moon, stripping the matriarch of her claim to the crown and throwing the succession wide open. Carmilla wanted that crown. She had always wanted it, and now she saw a way to take it, not with fangs, but with paperwork and patience. She began to whisper in the ears of the elder houses. "Have you seen the Ravencroft bride?" Ashen, trembling, fading, Celine bound herself to a corpse in waiting. Is that the strength we want holding the highest seat when the moon turns red? She filed a formal petition with the council to review the fitness of the bond. So now there were 2 clocks running down. The one inside Mina burning out, and the one outside ticking toward a red moon and a courtroom of ancient predators who would happily tear Celine's crown, and her wife, away, and blame Mina's own broken heart for it. Celine knew all of this, and Celine, being Celine, decided the answer was not to explain. The answer was to declare war on everyone at once. But first, she had to save her wife. And to do that, she had to break, in one single night, the terrible spell that the whole cruel world had spent 5 weeks casting. She chose a dinner to do it. A mandatory one. Celine summoned 3 of her most powerful lieutenants and their consorts to the penthouse under the pretense of discussing the Volkov War and a newly seized shipping route through the harbor. And she made very sure that Carmilla Bathory, as a courtesy to a rival house in these tense times, was on the guest list. Mina emerged from the master suite in a long-sleeved gown of deepest black, and the sight of her made Silas look away and Celine's jaw go rigid. She looked exhausted. Beautiful and soft and utterly worn thin, the light in her flickering like a candle somebody kept opening a window near. She swayed slightly as she took her seat at Celine's right hand, and her pale fingers went straight to the water glass to steady herself. The staff served something rich and warm and perfect, the kind of meal meant to call a body back to life. The hall filled with the low murmur of ancient business and the delicate clink of crystal. Celine did not touch her glass. Her silver eyes were fixed, unblinking, entirely on her wife. Mina picked up her fork. Her hand shook. She looked at the plate in front of her the way you'd look at a ledge. She set the fork back down. Carmilla's voice slid across the table like a blade drawn slow. "Not hungry, little Ravencroft? Sweet as arsenic." No. I think that's wise. A bit of restraint does wonders for a girl, especially one like you. A ripple of soft, cruel laughter moved down the table, and a few of the ancient consorts hid their smiles behind their glasses. Mina flushed a deep, humiliated red, the most warmth she'd shown in a week, and dropped her eyes to her lap. I have a headache," she whispered. Celine set down her knife. The soft click of silver against black marble rang through the hall like a gunshot in a chapel. Every conversation died. The temperature in the room seemed to plunge. Somewhere, a consort's glass rattled against its saucer as her hand began, involuntarily, to tremble. "Leave," Celine said. Her voice was very, very quiet. That was the terrifying part. 3 centuries of command distilled into a single soft word, and every immortal in that room felt it land in the base of their spine like a cold hand. One of the lieutenants blinked. "My lady, we haven't concluded the... Get out of my house." The words came out low and even, and yet the chandelier overhead shivered on its chain, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lean inward. That was all it took. Ancient, terrible creatures who feared almost nothing on this earth scrambled up from their chairs, nearly overturning them, and fled toward the elevator like children caught in a burning building. Carmilla's poisonous smirk fell clean off her face. She was the last through the doors, and she looked, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely afraid. The doors slid shut. The penthouse went utterly, suffocatingly silent. Mina was frozen in her chair, tears standing bright in her eyes. She was certain that Celine was furious with her, that she had embarrassed the matriarch in front of the entire court, that this cold and ancient woman was finally, at last, going to cast her out into a world she didn't understand and had never wanted. Celine rose slowly and walked the length of the long table until she stood directly behind her wife's chair. Her cold, scarred hands came to rest, with impossible gentleness, on Mina's shoulders, and she felt it, the sharp ridge of a collarbone beneath the black fabric, a bone that had not been there a month ago, a body burning itself down to nothing. The realization went through Celine's chest like a stake. Mina. Her voice dropped into a low, gravel register that Mina had never heard from her. "Look at me." Mina turned her head. A tear broke loose and slid down her sallow cheek. Celine pulled out the chair beside her and sat, close, deliberately close, trapping her warm wife between an ancient body and the edge of the table. She reached out one cold thumb and caught the tear before it could fall. "You are letting yourself go out," she said. And there was rage in it, yes. But underneath the rage was something raw, something that sounded almost like grief. "You are putting out the one warm light in 300 years of my dark. Why?" And the dam broke. "Because I'm an embarrassment to you," Mina choked out, both hands flying up to cover her face. "I hear them, Celine. I hear every word. I don't belong in your world. I'm too much. Too soft, too warm, too heavy, too alive, and too big, and too everything. Her voice cracked into pieces. "I just wanted to be beautiful enough, cold enough, enough for you. If this story has its hooks in you right now, and if you're feeling that ache in your chest for Mina, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. Take 1 second before we go on. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments, how many names do you think are already on Celine's list tonight? Because trust me, she's counting. More dark love stories like this one, every week, right here on Nightborn Lady. Celine's silver eyes went black. The confession sat in her chest like a blade being slowly turned. Someone had done this. Someone had taken the warmest, most radiant, most alive thing in her endless cold existence and convinced it to snuff itself out, and they had done it in her own house, under her own crown, while she was off fighting a war. She reached out and took Mina's face in both of her cold hands, and she made her look up. "Listen to me very carefully," Celine said, low and slow, her lips a breath from Mina's trembling ones, because I am only going to say this once, and I need you to carry it for the rest of your life. I am a woman who has walked this earth for 300 years. I have had my choice of every cold, perfect, sharp-edged creature the night has ever produced. Empresses, killers, beauties who have not aged a day since the fall of kingdoms. Her thumbs stroked slowly over Mina's wet cheeks. And I did not want a single one of them. I chose you. I chose your warmth. I chose the flush in your cheeks and the beat of your stubborn heart and the way this whole house feels alive the moment you walk into a room. I chose every soft, heavy, gorgeous inch of you, Mina. If I had wanted a cold thing that survives on cruelty and starves itself to fit inside a smaller and smaller box, I have had 3 centuries to marry one. I never did. Her voice dropped lower still. Do you understand what I am telling you? You are not too much. You are the only enough I have ever found. She reached over, took Mina's untouched plate, and set it down directly in front of her. So here is what is going to happen, Celine continued, and now her voice shifted, the tenderness folding back inside the cold, absolute authority of a matriarch issuing a decree that the world would not survive her enforcing. You are going to pick up that fork, and you are going to let yourself be cared for. Tonight, and every night after. You are going to let your warmth come back, and you are going to stop, tonight, hating the body that I worship. She let the silence stretch, deadly and deliberate. And if I ever discover who taught you to do this to yourself, every cold little creature who ever whispered a word about your body, every one of them who sent you those poisons dressed up as gifts, starting with Carmilla Bathory, Celine's smile was a slow, terrible, beautiful thing. I will not give them mercy, Mina. I will find them. I will drain the centuries out of them, one long night at a time, and when they are nothing but husks begging for a grave, I will refuse to grant them one. I will make this entire city understand what happens to those who dim my wife. Mina gasped, her eyes flying wide. Celine, no, you can't. I am Celine Ravencroft, she said, smooth as black water, her gaze burning with a devotion so absolute it bordered on the terrifying. I have outlived every law that ever tried to tell me can't. And I will burn this city down to ash and salt before I let one more of them make my wife hate the body I would kneel to worship. She slid the plate the last inch forward. Now, let yourself be fed, Mina, or I start hunting tonight. Trembling, overwhelmed by the sheer, impossible weight of being wanted like that, wanted because of the very things she'd been taught to hate, Mina reached for her fork. The first taste hit her tongue, and her starving, living body woke violently, gratefully, all at once. She closed her eyes. A broken little sound escaped her. She took another bite. And another. And something that had been clenched shut in her chest for 5 weeks slowly, painfully, began to unclench. Celine did not move. She sat rigid and close, her ancient body a wall between Mina and the vast dark of the empty hall, and she watched her wife with an intensity that Mina could feel like heat on her skin, tracking the movement of her throat as she swallowed, feeling through the bond the exact moment the warmth began, faintly, to return. When Mina slowed, her body unused to being cared for, Celine didn't push. She simply poured a glass of deep red wine and pressed it gently into her wife's trembling fingers. Good, she murmured, in a voice like gravel and velvet. Good girl. That night marked the absolute end of Mina's silent suffering and the beginning of something the court would never understand, because it looked, from the outside, like the coldest woman in the city had gone completely and utterly soft. But Celine did not do soft the way anyone else did. Later, behind the bulletproof oak doors of their master suite, she showed Mina what she had meant. Not with pretty speeches, Celine had never been good at those, but with a devotion so total it left Mina shaking. She traced the silver stretch marks across Mina's wide hips like they were constellations she'd been searching the sky for. She pressed her cold lips to the soft curve of Mina's belly and lingered there. She tangled her scarred hands in the plush of Mina's thighs and looked up at her wife like she was something carved from warm marble by a hand kinder than God's. Every night, Celine breathed against her skin, "You let yourself be cared for." And every night, "I remind you what you are." Her fangs grazed, gentle, over the warm pulse at Mina's throat. A communion, an oath, a claiming all at once. "You are not a meal, Mina. You are the reason I still bother having a heart." And for the first time since she'd walked down that red-lit aisle, Mina let herself believe it. But belief was only the beginning. Because Celine Ravencroft had made a vow at that dinner table, a dark, specific, city-ending vow, and Celine Ravencroft always kept her word. The hunting was about to begin. Celine did not tackle her wife's recovery the way a gentle woman would. She had no soft words, no therapist's patience, no talent for reassurance that didn't sound like a court order. What she had was 300 years of siege warfare, and she turned every bit of it on the single goal of bringing her wife's warmth roaring back to life. By the following dusk, the penthouse staff were summoned and given a new set of unbreakable laws. First, the mirrors. Every cold, punishing, floor-to-ceiling mirror in Mina's bathroom, the ones she'd stood in front of and learned to hate herself, was pulled down and replaced with warm, low, forgiving light. The little tools of self-punishment Mina had hidden away were found by Silas and destroyed, quietly and without comment, and never spoken of again. Second, the wardrobe. Every shapeless, hiding, apologizing garment Mina owned was bagged up and burned in the incinerator, and Celine personally summoned the finest couturiers the night court had, the ones who'd sneered at her wife weeks ago now arriving pale and eager and very, very careful. Mina was measured for silks and velvets and midnight cashmere that hugged her wide hips, that celebrated her heavy breasts, that draped like water over her thick thighs. There was no more draping her in forgiving shapes. There was nothing to forgive. Third, and most importantly, the caring. Mina was to let herself be nourished, fully and richly, and to let her warmth return. And Celine made one thing brutally clear to the entire household. If her wife's light ever dimmed again, on anyone's watch, the person who had let it happen would answer to the matriarch personally. She would abandon a war mid-battle and cross the city in minutes to sit beside her wife and coax the warmth back herself. She proved it, twice, in the first week, and slowly, night by night, meal by meal, kindness by kindness, the ashen gray left Mina's cheeks. The rosy, living flush came home. The light came back on inside her, brighter now, because it had almost gone out. But Celine's dark vow at the dinner table had not been a bluff to frighten a trembling wife into eating. It had been a promise, and now she began, with cold and surgical patience, to keep it. It started as a run of very bad luck for certain ancient houses. Lady Vasquez, one of Carmilla's closest allies, the one who had gift-wrapped those pale skin elixirs and sent them to the penthouse with a laughing little note, found her family's centuries-old blood import concern seized in a single night, its assets frozen, its old and careful secrets suddenly, mysteriously, in the hands of authorities who should never have known they existed. The Vasquez line was ruined by the week's end. They fled the city before the moon turned, and no one in the court would say their name. Lady Renata, who had snickered at Mina's body across a court gathering and called her the warm little snack, her consort's territory in the outer boroughs simply evaporated overnight, absorbed clean into Ravencroft Holdings while she slept. Renata found herself turned away from the doors of every elite gathering in the city, her invitations rescinded, her name struck from every list. She was erased from the night court as thoroughly as if she had walked into the sun. One by one, the women who had taught Mina to starve found the ground opening beneath them, and every one of them understood, though none dared say it, exactly why. But Celine saved her most surgical, most public, most devastating strike for Carmilla Bathory. Because Carmilla hadn't only mocked Mina. Carmilla had petitioned the Blood Council to dissolve the bond. She had tried to use Mina's own broken heart as the weapon to take Celine's crown. For that, Celine wanted the whole court watching when the House of Bathory fell. The Blood Moon Gala came at last, the crown jewel of the immortal season, held in the vaulted, candle-drowned ballroom of the old Waldorf, beneath chandeliers older than the country itself. Every ancient house in the city would be there. And so would Carmilla's petition, which the council was set to hear at the stroke of the red moon's height. Mina walked in on Celine's arm. She was terrified, her heart hammering like a trapped bird, which every vampire in the room could hear. But she looked absolutely, devastatingly alive. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, cut low to showcase the soft, gorgeous swell of her chest, gathered at her waist and flowing like a river over her wide hips. The sallow gray of the dimming was gone completely, burned away, replaced by a warm, radiant flush that made her glow like a hearth in a hall full of cold marble. In a room of 300 beautiful dead things, she was the only one who looked warm, and it made her the most magnetic creature in the building. When they entered, the whispering stopped. Not out of mockery this time, out of fear. Celine's recent purges had swept through the court like a cold wind, and everyone in that ballroom knew what had caused them. They looked at the warm, radiant woman on the matriarch's arm the way you look at a live wire. Carmilla stood near the great fountain of dark wine, flanked by her father, Lord Bathory of the Harbor Covens. She began, out of pure habit, to curl her lip as Mina approached, and then Celine stepped directly into her path, broad shoulders blocking her view of Mina entirely, and Carmilla's sneer died on her mouth. "Bathory," Celine said, her voice carrying easily over the string quartet. "What a profound shame about the seizure of your harbor holdings this morning." Lord Bathory's ancient face went the color of ash. His glass trembled. What seizure? Celine, what are you talking about?" "The authorities intercepted 3 of your vessels at first light," Celine replied, swirling the wine in her glass, unbothered as a woman discussing weather. "Contraband. The old kind. The kind your house has moved through that harbor for 200 years, thinking no one was clever enough to prove it." She smiled. "The indictments are being unsealed as we speak. Your covens are already scattering. You are, I'm afraid, a liability, Lord Bathory, and this court does not keep liabilities." Carmilla's manicured hands flew to her mouth. You set us up." Celine turned, at last, to look directly at her. Her silver eyes were terrible in their calm. "I told my wife," she said softly, "that I would find every creature who taught her to starve, that I would drain the centuries out of them and leave them begging for a grave I would refuse to give." She let that sit in the sudden, ringing silence of the ballroom. "Consider the loss of your entire house a mercy, Carmilla, because that is the kind version. And your petition to the council?" Celine's smile went colder than the space between stars. "Withdrawn. There is no Bathory house left to file it. If you ever speak my wife's name again, if you ever so much as let your eyes drift in her direction, I promise you, I will not be nearly so diplomatic." She turned her back on them, dismissed them from her attention as completely as if they had never existed, and offered her arm to her wife. As Lord Bathory dragged his hysterical, unraveling daughter out of the ballroom, the message rolled through the assembled court like a tide. There was no longer any question. The Ravencroft consort, the warm one, the soft one, the living one they had all whispered about, was untouchable. The Donna of the Night Court could not be touched. The destruction of the Bathory house brought a strange, insulated peace to Mina's world. But desperate, ruined creatures do not simply fade into the dark. They rot. And rot, in the immortal world, has a way of coming back. A month passed. Under Celine's absolute, uncompromising devotion, Mina bloomed fully back into her soft, heavy, radiant self, warmer than she had ever been, because now she was warmed from the inside too. The gnawing anxiety that had once scraped at her bones was gone, replaced by a truth she could no longer deny. Celine Ravencroft did not merely tolerate her plus-size body. She was ravenously, reverently obsessed with it. Behind the closed doors of their suite, she worshipped Mina like something holy. She spent long hours tracing the silver marks on her hips, pressing kisses to the soft curve of her belly, tangling her hands in the plush of her thighs, drinking in her warmth with a devotion that rebuilt Mina's shattered confidence brick by careful brick. She adorned her in ancient jewels fitted to her plump wrists, draped her in fabrics that celebrated every curve, and made her feel, every single night, like a warm and priceless thing carved by a loving hand, not a problem the world needed to solve. But Mina had learned something in all of it. A queen cannot survive the night forever hiding behind her matriarch. Sooner or later, she has to reach out and take the heavy crown herself. If you're still with us this far into the dark, then you're part of this story now. You have been, since the first bite came back to Mina's lips. So do this with me. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell us down in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. The vow at the dinner table, or the fall of the Bathory house. We read every one. This has been the tale of the warm bride and the woman who burned a city to protect her. This is Nightborn Lady. Now, one last scene, and it belongs to Mina. It happened on a bitterly cold, snowing afternoon in late December at her father's little bakery in the Bronx, Joneson & Son, tucked into the warm heart of Arthur Avenue. Celine was locked in a volatile, high-stakes sit-down across the city with the envoys of the Chicago Covens, so she'd sent Silas and two of her most lethal guards to escort Mina to the one place that still smelled like her whole life before all of this. Warm yeast, powdered sugar, and the simple safety of the past. Mina was laughing, her cheeks flushed with life and cold air, dusting a huge silver tray of fresh cannoli with a sifter when the brass bell above the door chimed sharp and sudden. It wasn't a customer coming in from the snow, it was Carmilla Bathory. And Carmilla looked deranged, a skeletal shadow of the pristine, untouchable creature she had been a month ago. The ruin of the house had done to her what the dimming had once done to Mina, but worse, and self-inflicted, and merciless. Her once immaculate coat was stained with slush and grime. Her hair hung in tangled, greasy ropes. Her cheekbones jutted from a hollowed, sallow face, and she looked less like an ancient beauty than like a starving ghost that had wandered in from the storm. Her father was locked in the deepest cell the court reserved for its fallen, awaiting judgment. Her name had been struck from every list. Her endless money had turned to nothing overnight. And in her shaking right hand, she held a thin silver blade, a stake tipped in something that could end even a matriarch's consort, and she pointed it, trembling, straight at Mina's chest. Silas moved in an instant, faster than the human eye, a weapon of his own drawn and leveled, snarling at Carmilla to drop it. But Mina did not flinch. Instead, she lifted one flour-dusted hand, palm out toward her guard. "Wait," Mina said, and the sheer, undeniable authority in her own voice shocked even her. It rang off the tiled walls of the little bakery, and Silas, 300 years old and afraid of almost nothing, went still. "You ruined my life, you warm little pig," Carmilla screamed, tears cutting tracks down her filthy, sunken face. "You took the crown that was mine. You took Celine. You destroyed my father, my house, everything. I have nothing left, nothing. I'm going to put this through your heart and let her come home to find you cold." And for one microscopic second, the ghost of the old Mina, the timid, insecure girl who had once burned herself down to nothing just to please vicious creatures exactly like this one, wanted to cower behind the pastry case. But then Mina looked, really looked, at the shaking, broken, starving thing in front of her. And she understood something that went all the way down to the bone. Carmilla was the one starving now. Not warmth, not food, but starving of power, of relevance, of any substance at all. She had spent centuries mistaking cruelty for strength, and now she was hollow. And Mina, with all her heavy softness, all her unapologetic warmth, every gorgeous, expansive inch of her, was the most powerful woman in the entire city. Not because she'd made herself small enough to fit, but because she had let herself be exactly, fully, warmly what she was, and been chosen for it, worshipped for it, protected by a woman who would gladly burn the world to ash before she let a single soul touch her. "I didn't steal your life, Carmilla," Mina said, and she stepped slowly, deliberately, out from behind the counter. Silas tensed to fire, but Mina moved with a calm, lethal grace she hadn't known she owned. "You lost it. Because you spent 300 years believing that being cruel was the same thing as being strong. It never was." "Shut up!" Carmilla shrieked, her thumb shaking as she brought the blade up higher. "Do it then," Mina said, and her voice dropped into a chilling, level, emotionless register that sounded, suddenly and unmistakably, exactly like her wife. "Put it through my heart. But you know what happens next. You've always known." She took another step forward, chin raised, straight toward the trembling point of the blade. "Celine won't simply end you. She'll drain the centuries out of you, one long night at a time, in a room with no windows and no dawn. She'll reach into that cell they're keeping your father in and pull him out just so you can watch. You're pointing a blade at the matriarch's bound consort." Carmilla, Mina stepped so close now that the cold silver nearly brushed her flour-dusted apron. "You were dead the moment you walked through that door. The only question left is how slow." Carmilla's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the blade. "You spent so long mocking my body," Mina whispered. "My warmth. Calling me a meal. A snack. Too much. Too soft, too alive." She held Carmilla's hollow, desperate eyes. "But look at us now. I'm the Donna of the whole court, and you're nothing but a starving ghost bleeding out in the snow. Drop it." A broken, agonized sob tore out of Carmilla's throat. Her numb, frozen fingers opened. The blade clattered onto the black and white tile. Silas was on her before it finished ringing, pinning her to the brick wall, binding her wrists. When Celine arrived 22 minutes later, her armored car sliding sideways onto the icy asphalt of Arthur Avenue, she nearly tore the reinforced door off its hinges coming through it. Her silver eyes were wide, feral, wild, with a panic no one in the immortal underworld had ever once seen on her. Because she'd felt it through the bond, the spike of terror and adrenaline, and for 22 minutes she had not known if her wife's warmth was about to go out forever. She found Mina sitting calmly at a little caf table, both hands wrapped around a warm mug, perfectly, radiantly alive. Mina, it came out of Celine like a wound. She crossed the room and pulled her wife up out of the chair and crushed her soft, warm body against her chest, one cold hand cradling the back of her head. I'm going to end her. I'm going to make it last a year. No, Celine. Mina pulled back just enough to take her wife's tense, ancient face in her warm hands, looking straight into those wild silver eyes. She's already broken. Ending her is a mercy. Quick, clean, she doesn't deserve mercy. A slow, iron calm settled over Mina's features. Let her live. Let her freeze on the streets she used to own. Let her watch us rule the whole court from above, warm and untouchable, for the rest of her endless little life. That's the punishment. Celine went very still. She stared down at her soft, heavy, radiant bride, at the immovable iron spine she'd just watched rise up beneath all that warmth and softness, and something ancient and cold in her chest cracked wide open with pride. A slow, dark, deeply proud smile spread across her face. Look at you, she breathed. My warm, gorgeous, terrifying queen. She leaned down and kissed Mina deeply, right there in the flour-dusted little bakery in the Bronx, snow falling soft against the glass, and murmured against her warm lips, the world is yours. It always was. You just finally reached out and took it. Under the next blood moon, when the court gathered to see whether the Ravencroft crown would hold, it did not merely hold. It was renewed, not by Celine's power, but by the warmth of the woman beside her, the consort the whole court had once whispered would be a meal by the second week. The old law had wanted proof that the matriarch had a reason to keep the world standing. She did. She was standing right there, in emerald velvet, warm and soft and unafraid, wearing a crown she had reached out and claimed with her own two hands. And the message rolled out through every coven in the city, clear as a bell over snow: the Donna is warm. The Donna is soft. The Donna is untouchable. And the woman who loves her will burn the world to ash before she lets you say one word against her. Did you love watching Mina reclaim her warmth, her worth, and her crown? The Night Court is ruthless, but nothing in this world, living or dead, is more powerful than a woman who finally recognizes exactly what she's worth, and the one who would destroy an entire city to protect it. If Celine and Mina's dark love story kept you on the edge of your seat tonight, smash that like button. Share this story with every fellow lover of Gothic romance you know. Subscribe for more thrilling tales just like this one, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The night is long here, and there are so many more stories in the dark. This has been Nightborn Lady. Until the next moon.